I'm going to begin today with a reading by Linda Olson Pebbles. Growing up is the hardest thing we'll ever do, and it really is all we ever do. We move through each stage, learning all we can, then figuring out what's important and what can be left behind. We look for counsel, we resist advice, we acquire everything we think is important and load our baggage, and then we struggle trying to carry backpacks that are too heavy. We unload, we go on, and maybe later we find out that what was left behind is what was needed, and what we brought is not helpful. And so we start again, learning, acquiring, sorting through the packing, leaving stuff behind, choosing pathways, feeling bound, feeling alone, feeling crowded in. Each of us grows through childhood to adolescence to adulthood, through stages of discovery and mastery, and each of our lives. We encounter the challenges of casting off clothes which no longer fit us, of knowing ourselves anew, of feeling our own worth, and of finding what freedom really means. And it seems to me that we go through it over and over. The journey is not a single continuous path. We continually repeat the cycle of feeling free, becoming encumbered, striving to understand and to learn more, then freeing ourselves again until we finally can know ourselves, become ourselves. In my 20s, the height of my young adulthood, I had many ideas and ideals of who I thought I would be and what my life would look like. As the reading said, I thought I knew just what to pack in my backpack that would help me along my journey to the person I knew I should become. And I believed that planning and perseverance would carry me through and everything would line up as I had dreamed. And in the beginning it did. By 30, I was married to my high school sweetheart with a brand new baby, had finished my master's program in Chicago, and was living the life I thought I had wanted. And of course, this is about when things started to fall apart, and when the idealism of young adulthood gave way to the reality of being a plain old adult, as Marissa said so well earlier. What seemed a wonderful marriage began to crumble, and it was clear that no matter how hard I fought for this partnership, it was a really deeply unhealthy place to be for all of us involved. And the reality of becoming a young, single, divorced mom set in, and I moved back to my really wonderful hometown to be sure that the love and support of my family and my community could help my son John and I through. I knew I wanted to move back to Moscow someday, but the timing and circumstances were not all as I had imagined. And suddenly the image of who I was supposed to be and who I had become were wildly, wildly disparate. The deeply painful realization was as profound and overwhelming as any loss I've endured. I grieved the loss of the life I'd planned for myself. But here in this dark hour, one of the greatest gifts of crossing over from my young adulthood began to unveil itself. I could create a new person, a new adult, a stronger, more deep person. After being shattered, I could pick up the pieces and put them together in a new way. And in the way that everything fell apart, a whole brand new future opened up. I could choose to follow my calling in church life, and I began serving here 3 years ago. I changed my last name to one of my own choosing, and in that way, grabbed a new identity. I bought a tiny, adorable house, as girly as I could find, with way too many chandeliers. And I started a new relationship this fall with a man who adores me and challenges me, whom I adore, and I'm sure I challenge deeply. And I can build a true partnership. I once again unpacked my metaphorical bag, set aside what needed to be left behind, and I feel right now like I'm repacking and walking forward. I'm still in the middle of all this growing, and I'm still forgiving myself almost daily for not being the person I thought I should be. One of my biggest struggles right now is the view of myself as a mom. I wanted so badly to give my son the perfect family, the life like I grew up in. I didn't want to have him come from a family of different parents living in different places, and he struggles all the time with, I miss you when I'm at Dad's, and I miss Dad when I'm with you. And I want to be that energetic, attentive, creative mom that always just has the answers and knows when to pull back and let her child go free. And sometimes I almost hit that mark, or there's brief periods like walking in Idler's Rest yesterday and seeing snakes and chipmunks and letting him run faster than I think he should. But then other times I'm the cranky, tired mom who just can't play, the one who breathes a sigh of relief when he finally falls asleep, the one who feels guilty about losing my cool, or the one who I often hover when he really can do it on his own. The strain of adulthood, the work, the bills, the relationships, the friendships, my own mental well-being and self-care are just constant strains. There really is no way to do it all, and I struggle with the reality that I can't be perfect. I won't be a perfect mom. I couldn't be the perfect wife. I'm not the perfect partner. And I feel the stress and failure of this each and every day. But in this process, I'm also finding the gift of self-forgiveness. And I'm discovering who exactly I am now in this moment as my adulthood unfolds. And I remind myself that I am worthy, I am good, I am enough. In the end, crossing over to adulthood for me meant saying goodbye to youthful visions of myself and finding that the reality of my life as it has unfolded is really, really amazing. Each day I get to watch my son in the magic of childhood. He has his first loose tooth, and we talk about the tooth fairy every single day. In my new relationship, I get to learn about myself as a partner and how to shape my life with another imperfect but perfectly wonderful human being. I get to accept my own struggles and reach out to community when I'm in need. And I feel the hands of so many lift me up. The parent group that we have here that I host, it really feeds me as much as I have ever fed anyone else. So I don't get the life that I planned and made choices and dreamed of in my 20s. But I do get one that has more depth and richness than I'd ever imagined. And really sharing this story and being here with you lets me know that everything has all been worth it. So now Brandi will share her reflections.
Good morning. I'm told I'm a grown-up now. I made it. I want to say thank you first to my beloved community. Thank you so much for marking this transition. It largely goes unnoticed, and asking me to share some of my experiences today, it's just affirmation that we're in the right home. Oh, honey, breast is best, you know. I peer at the source in the intrusively helpful voice, my eyes bleary, my face surely showing all signs of the sleep that I'm not getting. I'd been trying to match the WIC voucher to the proper formula, and it was proving a daunting task for my remaining brain cells. Our first placement as a foster family had come suddenly. A kindergartner, her almost 2-year-old brother, and a 5-month-old baby. I'd become a mom 3 years earlier. I taught elementary school before that. Surely I can handle kiddos in that age range, right? I was wrong. I was so wrong. 4 days in, running on little sleep and way too much caffeine, and here I stand, just trying to make sure the baby gets fed. My tired eyes find a well-dressed woman in her 60s watching me with distaste. For your baby, breast is best, you know. She pauses, waits to see if her good advice will sink in. I'm too tired and stunned to give a coherent reply, but she stomps off oblivious anyway, and I fight the urge to shout after how I'd breastfed my daughter for 19 months. As a parent officially entering adulthood, I'm no longer sensitive to the judgmental glares of strangers in the supermarket. Well, not as sensitive. I'm much more confident and willing to stand by my own decisions. I remember that unending freedom that came with young adulthood. Everything was new and nothing yet decided. Some of the big choices were actually pretty easy to make. Moving to Moscow, pursuing my husband. Even my eventual career path came to me easily. I remember the conversation with Ryan. What would you do if you knew you could not fail? Teach kids to read. I answer, not skipping a beat. Teach kids to read. What's stopping you? I give some excuse that seems monumental, but in hindsight is actually pretty insignificant. No, really, what's stopping you? At 25, I began a high school level math class that would allow me to become a student at the University of Idaho. There I found my passion was well placed. The guiding and encouragement of the next generation is something I do with great enthusiasm. I feel most alive when I'm working with kiddos in a classroom and getting them excited about something new. But then, once again, I had to make a choice. This one was a little tougher. You see, Ryan and I had discussed at length about how important it was to us to have an adult at home with our children. We had a new baby girl who was just this magical little creature. You might know her. We were only just getting to know her, and I hated being apart from her. Though I loved teaching intensely, it just didn't provide enough to support our family of 3. We decided I would not renew my contract with the school district, and I would stay at home to care for Alora. I remember being so excited to spend more quality time with our little girl, but I also remember feeling really guilty about it. I felt like I needed to explain or justify my decision to stay home, as if I were ungrateful for how hard others had fought for me to be able to even have a career. Meanwhile, when I was teaching, I felt like I had to explain or justify my decision to teach while I had a baby at home, as if I were ungrateful that I was finally able to have the child I so desperately longed for. I made my choice, but it took a couple years before I really came to know it was the right one for me. Several years before, the choice that really cemented my identity, when I became a plain old adult. We need to take your fallopian tube, she says in a deadpan voice. Is there any way to save the baby? I hear myself ask this. No. Can I have some time to think? We can give you a few minutes, but not long. It's dangerous to wait too long. They step out the door, leaving us dumbfounded and without an easy way forward. In a foreign country, just the two of us, making major medical decisions in a foreign language without any chance to do any research. Once again, we made a choice. And that choice broke us. But that choice made us too. It was that moment when we really grew up. It wasn't just us pretending to be adults anymore. The decisions we made had real, life-altering effects that would echo throughout the rest of our lives. It was these choices, big and small, which made up the framework of my young adulthood. These choices, sometimes made with wisdom, sometimes with instinct, sometimes with a deep breath and a jump. I look forward to the next phase of my life as I leave the time where I make choices and I enter the time where I simply live them.
I feel as though my portion of the service is going to be deeply an echo of Ginger's and Brandi's. We did not read each other's writing up until this time. We're hearing them for the first time. So my apologies if much of what I have said, much of what I say has already been said. I suspect that just as American society passively suggests that white male is the default, as anything else requires a label, female, black, Latino, etc., the adult group's lack of a label or recognition as a specialist stage unto its own belies its privilege. One might consider that most programming in our church, the services themselves, and the very facilities we occupy are designed with the adults in mind. Furniture and hallways are able-bodied adult size. Children exit the service so that we can listen to sermons such as this one that are more suited to adults. We are the default congregants, the volunteers and staff members that keep the gears turning, the RE teachers, the editors of the church website and Facebook page, the board members, and the post-event cleaner-uppers. And yet, while we become privileged members of the congregation with all the responsibility that entails, it can feel somewhat invisible. We do what is expected of us, we tend to details and take on extra duties. In our congregational discernment program with Tandy Rogers last year, we identified ourselves as a congregation that celebrates. Why not celebrate the adults in our midst, taking on the yoke of maturity, finally growing comfortable in their own skin? The adults who learn about setting healthy boundaries or learn to take a stand against something that they used to put up with. The adults who are raising families, enriching our communities, no longer in the season of potential greatness and blossoming possibilities, but now actually bearing fruit, whether that be in the form of children or careers or simply coming into one's own as a fulfilled human being. With our emergence into real-life grown-up adulthood comes a new vantage point to see our surroundings. We see the many, many faces of injustice, the depth of brokenness. We recognize the sheer power of the darkness around us and know now that we can't dismantle it as easily as we'd once imagined. We see how small we truly are, and sometimes we despair. There is so much work to be done. But there's so much work to do at work, too. We have deadlines to meet and emails to answer. We have spreadsheets to update, orders to fill, roofs to repair, and there's so much work at home. We have dishes to wash, groceries to buy, bedding to change, and toilets to scrub. Don't we deserve a break? Either a break from the never-ending day-to-day custodial work of family or home, or maybe a break from the income-generating jobs we hold down so that we have time and energy to tackle those looming threats of war, environmental degradation, racism, or hate? How can we heal the world while we're so busy taking care of all that life demands of us? Or conversely, can we be forgiven for turning away from those intangible evils and instead try to fulfill our more immediate duties at home and at work to maintain our lives like the grown-ups we claim to be? There simply aren't enough hours in the day to do everything and to feel like we did our best at any of it. Mother Teresa is often quoted as having said, "To change the world, go home and love your family." But that imperative to think globally and act locally feels to me like a free pass sometimes from broader responsibility. It's an easy excuse with no real hardship or sacrifice required. But caught in the middle of home life and the wider world, we feel guilt for neglecting one or the other arena. As capable, privileged adults in a first-world society, we feel obligated to chip away at the threats against our interdependent web of existence to protect the rights of our worldwide family. There is so much we could be doing to live out our UU ideals to create a better world. This new vantage point and our perspective from the grown-up scaffold we've summited affords us another discouraging view, the knowledge that lives are truly finite. Our days are not unlimited. Some of our goals will remain unattained. We recognize now that in order to fulfill certain priorities, others will have to be abandoned. The warnings we heard as youth that our idealism would be compromised as we aged have come to ring true. I remember scoffing at people who claimed that I'd soften with age, that my deep values would come to feel less certain. They were clearly sellouts and moral wimps. Of course, my most important duty was to do nothing less than heal the world. I would single-handedly convert everyone to a vegetarian diet. I would expose the flaws of unquestioning nationalism, and of course, create amazing artwork in all my free time. Yes. Young adults are a force of nature. But, as most of this audience already knows, and a good chunk of the rest of us are coming to understand, that vigor only lasts for so long. Regretfully, but with the best of intentions, we have to set down some of our protest signs, not all of them, mind you, and pick up a myriad of other responsibilities. It becomes difficult then to separate our identity as a beloved individual with inherent worth from the values of the activities that we perform, or from our seeming abandonment of the life missions that we held so dear. There is a temptation to take on more and more responsibilities, whether that's planning a picture-perfect holiday celebration for our extended family, or accepting a stressful but respectable promotion at work, or another volunteer position for a nonprofit with a really great mission statement, and it's an alluring temptation. Maybe this will ease some guilt, we hope. Maybe this will make me feel like I'm doing enough. Maybe this time the world will heal and I will have done my part and I'll get a commemorative plaque that says I can rest easy at night. But I know that the work will never be done. I know that someday I will look back on it and say, I'm too tired for this. I tried, but there's still more work to do. It will be the next generation's turn to pick up that pickaxe and try to dismantle all the evils in the world. And so it makes sense, at least intellectually, that the measure of an individual's worth is not related to saving the world, because that isn't the role of any one person. In the same way that it isn't necessary to maintain a magazine-worthy living room in order to be cherished and valued. As a wise woman in this congregation once told me, we are human beings, not human doings. And our very first UU principle upholds the belief that every person has inherent worth and dignity, regardless of our efforts. But how do we come to terms with that? How are we to find a comfortable harmony in our lives and a balance in our personal responsibility to the world around us? After all, are we not also the religion that professes what we do matters? More than one person has said to me, the only thing that no one else can do is to be a mother to your children, and that should be your first priority. And I see the truth in that, but I have the nagging feeling that it's also important to model activism and civic duty to my children. And isn't it also my duty to provide for them materially, to earn income that provides food, shelter, medical care, and countless other necessities, or to ensure that our home is clean, safe, and relatively tidy? How does one measure out the right amount of time or energy to invest in any given pursuit? What if my hours at work leave me too exhausted to tuck my kids into bed at the end of the night? What if doing the laundry and the dishes on Saturday means I don't have time to play a board game or watch a movie with my family, even though the kids have been asking me to snuggle up with them and watch the Flintstones for the last 2 weeks in a row? I have found much peace in the realization that there is no such thing as right or perfect. Any choice we make naturally precludes any other choice we might have made, but that doesn't mean that we have made the wrong choice by ignoring those other options. Every choice we make, every activity we choose to pursue, has the potential to do good, just as it has potential to bring regret, or to be misconstrued by others, or to become an opportunity for growth. Maybe being an adult means recognizing our own authority in making those choices, recognizing that we cannot predict the outcome of our choices, but that we can make informed ones and take calculated risk. We can be confident that any decision we have made is the right one for us because it's the one that we made. Others might offer advice or insight into what worked for them, but we have to make our own choices and then live with the outcome. I know myself more than ever today. I recognize my own power and authority and wisdom, nascent as it may be. The gift of adulthood is knowing that we have something worth saying and that our voice matters. Throughout all this internal turmoil, there is a constant, our selfhood, our essence. The young idealist, the dreamer, the artist, and the child that grew up. How do we nurture that inner self, our soul? The internet daily bombards us with advice on self-care. Our doctors, counselors, ministers, and friends advise us to reduce stress and pursue meditation, journaling, yoga, small group ministry, and a good cup of herbal tea. But when? I don't know. The alarm clock has been ringing ever earlier. The kids are hungry 100% of the time. They cannot find their left shoe. All the cereal bowls are in the sink, and they were already late for work tomorrow. I try to squeeze in phone calls while driving between work and appointments, or between home and the grocery store, and I feel guilty the whole time about dividing my attention between driving and talking on the phone. By the time I drag myself across that bedtime finish line, I crave an hour of mind-numbing Facebook and/or solitaire on my phone before I remember that there are still dishes to wash and clothes to set out for the next day. Life does not find it necessary to empower our attempts at self-care. There is no guarantee that we will get what we need, or that there is some magic formula that exists for creating a perfect life with balance and satisfaction. Being an adult, we discover, means that we are now the caregivers, no longer care recipients. In addition to the crises and messes conjured up by children or pets or acts of God, our own mistakes and messes are now our responsibility to rectify, and no one else will be coming to the rescue. The first time I got the flu, and then realized that my kids were completely unsympathetic, it was a shock. They still wanted lunch and their day of the week underpants, and they wanted me to mediate their constant arguments. A small portion of my brain still clung to the hope that someone, anyone, maybe my mom, would show up at the door and start taking charge of the situation, but it did not happen. Who then cares for adults in need, if not themselves? How do adults ask for help without feeling that they're somehow forfeiting their grown-up credentials? It might take a village to raise a child, but it also takes a community to sustain even the most capable of adults. Being an adult means facing a raging case of imposter syndrome face on and being comfortable with our weakness. As young adults, we suspected that if anyone knew how incompetent we really were, we would be permanently disgraced. Mistakes, missteps, and ignorance were carefully hidden away from public view, and the attempt to appear educated, wise, and responsible became a carefully constructed dress-up game of make-believe grown-ups. This, of course, leads only to shame, because we're not really that wise and educated and responsible. Becoming an adult means understanding that shame dwells only in darkness and silence, though. When we conceal our flaws, we imagine that no one else understands, or if they knew how stupid we were, no one would love us. In growing up, it becomes clear that true community and support relies on transparency, free admission of weakness. How else can we get the help we need if that need is hidden and born alone? This congregation has nurtured my journey from teenagerhood through my entire young adulthood, and now at age 36, here I am, a real live actual grown-up, whether I feel like one or not. Many of you here today have watched my bumbling path through questionable and/or experimental life choices, an 11-month-long first marriage, attempted dreadlocks not once but twice, a brief flirtation with deism when I converted to Islam, and then I tried, embarrassed, to pretend that none of that had ever happened, and you gave me the space to work through it all. You invited 20-year-old me to teach RE, sent me to regional conferences as a delegate. You were referrals on my job applications. You encouraged me to join the church board and then become president of the board, and I want to thank you for that. For empowering my growth from young and nervous and unsure to the somewhat more confident mom of a middle schooler who now stands before you. Even without a bridging ceremony, I know that you've been part of that transformation. Thank you. Please stay standing.